Am I doing? Okay, we're good. Okay. Hello, my name is Emilia Larach. I am a senior psychology major here at Marymount, and today I'm going to be presenting to you my thesis on the relationship between study abroad and global citizenship. So my advisors were Dr. Amadeo and Dr. DeWitt sitting in the audience, so I'm sure they're very tired of hearing me talk about it at this point. But so I first became interested in studying this topic when I studied abroad in Spain for a semester in Granada in the south. And a lot of the study abroad propaganda kind of totes themselves as being global citizen-making machines. And my primary research question was, is this true? Is that really possible? And how? So to start out, first I had to identify what a global citizen was and define it. So my definition of being a global citizen is essentially an individual who recognizes his or her role within the global community and consciously behaves in ways to support its development. One of the more difficult things at the beginning of my research was figuring out how to kind of organize the idea of global citizenship. So a lot of the research kind of has different ideas of what they think a global citizen is, or it's not really the same wording. So after looking through a lot of it, I came up with 6 dimensions of global citizenship that I thought really did a good job of categorizing and organizing the idea. So the first one is global awareness. Global awareness is essentially an outward awareness about the world as well as an inner awareness as about one's place in it. I have global lifestyle in there. I don't think it is necessarily a requirement to be a global citizen, but I feel like the two definitely interact with each other in a very passive and kind of dynamic relationship. So the more maybe conversations you have about global topics, if you have a lot of international friends, especially at Marymount, there's a lot of international students. If you watch a lot of international media, as a result, oftentimes you become more globally aware. And then once you're more globally aware, you seek out opportunities to have a more global lifestyle. So I have those two together, for that reason. The next, interpersonal affect, is the idea that an individual is open to interacting with other cultures and respectful with them, and essentially not threatened by them. So when you can develop interpersonal affect enough, it really helps to weaken us versus them mentalities and group biases that exist when people think that they don't belong to another group and therefore there's an in-group and an out-group and we just can't get along. So having interpersonal affect helps to highlight the similarities between groups instead of the differences. Self-efficacy, the belief in the power of self. So believing that you have the ability to affect change, feeling comfortable interacting with different cultures, and essentially having a good self-concept. Self-identification is what I really chose to focus on for my research, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. It's the idea that an individual chooses to self-identify as a member of the global community. A lot of social psychology research has said the more salient group membership is within a specific group, the more likely that individual will act in ways that benefit that group, but also they will possess the attitudes and the behaviors and the values that that group possesses as well. So the more likely you are to identify as being a member of the global community, then the more likely you would be to behave in such ways to benefit that group that you identify with. Then the last one, social responsibility and civic engagement. I group those together as well just because the more aware you are of the role that you play in the global community and the more conscious you are of your responsibility to others in that community, the more likely you will be to act. So volunteer, go to marches or demonstrations, be a more conscious consumer based on political and social values. So why did I choose identity? I just really like identity to begin with. I really like developmental psychology, especially adolescent development. But also another reason was when I was starting to read a lot of these studies about study abroad and international education, in a lot of the more qualitative research where there were interviews with individuals, most of the students, kind of the biggest change that students noted was a shift in their perception in 3 different things. One, the role of the United States in the world, their role as individuals in the world, and then what it meant to be American, essentially. So when we take this from a psychological standpoint, you'll see that role is really a form of social identity. So traditionally, identity development happened, or people would say it happened during adolescence. Erikson is most noted for this theory. He called it the stage of identity versus identity diffusion, essentially meaning that at this time of life, adolescents need to reflect on their social roles and kind of decide who they are, develop a sense of self with the ultimate goal of acquiring the virtue of fidelity. Fidelity being, I'm so comfortable with who I am as an individual that I can freely interact with other people, even if they may possess different ideologies than I do, and I'm comfortable having a genuine relationship with them. Now, as globalization grows the global middle class. A lot of students are staying in school a lot longer to be more competitive in the job market. So they might be going for 2 masters or a master's and a PhD in order to compete with other people in the job market, which is also pushing traditional timelines for development. So now this new period of emerging adulthood is showing up in the literature now as a time where instead of maybe getting married or pursuing a more serious career, young adults have the opportunity to more freely explore the possibilities for self-development and more carefully craft their identity. So instead of their identity being based on a social role, I went to do a bio undergrad, so I'm just going to go be a doctor now because that's what I'm supposed to do. Individuals are getting a chance to kind of more carefully craft their identities and pick who they want to be. And this period of time is known as moratorium, where individuals can explore without commitment and really decide and kind of forge their own paths in life. So they're going to question previously accepted beliefs, and they're going to kind of try and figure out who they are. And one of the biggest ways that research says that individuals do this, especially adolescents, is through their social relationships. So especially high schoolers, if you think back to high school, it was all about your friends. You didn't really care what your parents said. If your friend told you looked really great in the dress and your mom told you it didn't matter because your friend told you it was awesome. So when we tie that to the idea of a global citizen identity and being a member of the global community and study abroad, you'll see that social relationships serve almost as a form of transformative or experiential learning in that these individuals now, say they're abroad for a semester, they don't have their typical friend group anymore. They don't have that same type of peer support, so they have to make a new friend group while they're abroad. They might have a host family that they rely on, or they might have a couple people in their class that they learn to study with. And so it develops a form of trust and a form of belonging where individuals are able to feel more comfortable in the global community, and their global neighbors are now very tangible people in front of them. So what was once kind of an unknown other across the world is now someone I can touch and talk to. I can go out to tapas with them. I can explore the city with them, and it's a lot closer of a relationship. Because of this, study abroad is perfectly placed developmentally. So because study abroad enables individuals to really be exposed to diverse worldviews and unique ways of life while also fostering that sense of independence and that efficacy that you get from having to live in a different country by yourself, study abroad and kind of the structured experience of travel that it provides is a really beneficial and effective way to not only cultivate someone's identity, but also their global citizen identity. That is why for my research, I hypothesized that study abroad students would be significantly more likely to identify as members of the global community, and they would also score higher on the other scales of global citizenship. And then I also wanted to see how self-identification, that scale, related to and correlated with the other scales of global citizenship to kind of test my construct of global citizenship. So how I did this, it often felt like when I was trying to get enough people to participate in my survey that I was wrangling a bull by the horns. I ended up getting around 98 responses that I could use. Most of them were juniors and seniors. I wanted to keep them developmentally within kind of the same age group. And you'll see that they're pretty equally split between study abroad and non-study abroad. But if you look at the study abroad participants, almost half of them had only ever participated in a global classroom series. So almost half of the study abroad participants were only in a different country for about a week. And then the other 20% had done maybe a global classroom series, a short-term, multiple global classroom series, that kind of thing. And how I went about sampling was, first I emailed the study abroad students, and I tried to get as many as I could. And once I felt like nobody else was going to answer my emails, I proceeded to sample the non-study abroad students, and I tried to match them as best as possible. So I looked at the biggest majors, which ended up being social sciences and pre-professional studies, so like nursing, education, and I tried to match the non-study abroad students with similar majors so that it was easier to compare them. The actual survey that they took was a global citizenship survey that I constructed using 5 different instruments. I wanted to make sure all of the dimensions of global citizenship were present in the questions, and I also wanted to measure global lifestyle. So we ended up with 7 scales total to look at, and then they also filled out a demographic form about their language proficiency, previous international experience, personal variables. So what did I find? The first hypothesis was supported in that you can see self-identification is significantly higher in study abroad students than non-study abroad students. And then my second hypothesis was partially supported. So you'll see self-identification, global awareness, civic engagement, and global lifestyle. The means for those were all significantly higher in study abroad students than non-study abroad students, but self-efficacy and social responsibility, although the means are higher, they're not significantly higher. And then for my third hypothesis, self-identification was positively and significantly correlated with all of the other scales of global citizenship. You'll notice in this table and in the previous graph, interpersonal affect is not shown on here. When I was doing reliability analysis and testing kind of my scale of interpersonal affect, it wasn't reliable enough, so we didn't include that in the analysis, unfortunately. So going back to the idea that almost half of my study abroad participants were short-term study abroad, is what I call them, the Global Classroom Series, this really has significant impact on the way that we view length on the outcomes that we're looking for in study abroad. So the biggest way that it's different, obviously, is time. The students are not in the country as long as they would be, say, if they participated in a semester abroad or even a year abroad. So when there's no time to really integrate into the host community, you're not getting the same sort of immersive, authentic interactions with the members of the host community that you would get if you were there for a semester. You're not relying on them. You don't have that interdependency. And also it doesn't really allow for as much reflection. So you just kind of have this quick stint abroad, and then you come back, and if the proper educational classroom curricula aren't there with the professor to really get a student to reflect on their experiences, then a lot of times students might not have the motivation to do so themselves, and they don't learn from their experience as much. With all of that put together, I concluded that short-term study abroad was really more cross-cultural in nature versus intercultural. The idea of an intercultural experience is essentially having this immersive relationship, very collaborative, where individuals are working together for a common goal, and it really relies on the efforts of the individual. Whereas cross-cultural experiences emphasize more comparing and contrasting of cultures, but from afar. There's not that same aspect of kind of jumping in head first like there is with intercultural. So in doing so, cross-cultural experiences, though, are still very good to cultivate knowledge in the global awareness scale of global citizenship. So it still helps students kind of understand what's going on around them and giving them the knowledge and attitudes inherent to global citizens, but they're not necessarily going to develop the same behaviors or skills. So if we go back to the graph, self-efficacy wasn't strong, and that's a behavior or skill, right? Someone should feel like they know how to contribute to the global community. For this reason, I just think short-term programs are just different in nature, right? They serve more as an experiential approach to global awareness. So while you could cultivate global awareness in a classroom, study abroad, especially short-term study abroad, serves as a more effective way to do that, and it also serves as sort of a developmental sequence of global experiences. So I think that you can't become a global citizen overnight. Even if you were abroad for a year, you wouldn't come back and have all of the scales perfectly all the way to the top of global citizenship, attitude, and behavior, but it's a process along the way that, and I think short-term study abroad influences that and shapes it. So that being said, one of the hardest things about this type of research is the fact that a lot of times study abroad students self-select into that category, right? You can't make someone study abroad. They already have an interest in it. They choose to do it. So the individuals who choose to study abroad might already kind of have a bias and already have an interest in international affairs. They might already have some of the scales of global citizenship higher than a non-study abroad student. And also, it can be very different based on the experience when you're abroad. So this is me and two other Marymount students abroad, and we all had very different experiences because when we came back from being abroad, whether we lived with a host family or in an apartment, how we incorporated our experience abroad, what we learned, what we discovered, varied greatly depending on our other life experiences. So what you learn when you're abroad really depends on the other things happening in your life. So there's a lot of variables when you're trying to measure study abroad and the influence that it has on an individual, since it's very subjective. But the last part of my research that I really was interested in was highlighting the role of the university. So because universities are really here to educate the leaders of tomorrow, right, the future global citizens, they serve a very unique role in that they're the perfect place to foster a global citizen discussion. They serve as safe, student-centered environments where individuals can learn about their stances on things. They can actively explore, hear other people's opinions. And I think universities are really here to provide the critical thinking and the analytical tools that students need to kind of answer some of the questions that they may have about their role in a global community and in the world. So I think universities, which many have, they're bolstering their centers for global education, really pushing study abroad. But I think they should also be looking for opportunities to diversify the type of student who studies abroad. So they could do this by giving more scholarships for study abroad and really helping students figure out how to study abroad from the moment they get into university. So once they come in as a freshman, how is this going to look in my schedule? How am I going to plan this so that more students have the opportunity to study abroad and it's more accessible to others? And then going back to a sequence of global experiences, making sure that a university is internationalized enough and that there's enough opportunities to study what global citizenship means and to become more globally aware before going abroad, so that once they are abroad, they're able to more deeply and profoundly reflect on their experiences, and they'll be more ready for that experience and then ready to integrate it into their daily life once they return. So, the end. Does anybody have any questions?